The best way to predict the future is to create it. Welcome to the Humanscape podcast, where we help business leaders prepare for the future of work now. Are you ready to bring work to life and life to work? We are. Let's go. We're back and better than ever with another episode of the Humanscape podcast from HumanWorks 8. And today, we are going to lead with love, a core value of Penfield Children's Center that touches my heart. I'm Sean Golias, the thought catalyst with HumanWorks 8, and joining me is Jason Cochran, the adaptive futurist at HumanWorks 8. And we'll be your host today. As a reminder, the Humanscape podcast exists to help business leaders like you prepare for the future of work now. In just a few minutes, you'll hear from today's guest, Polina Makievsky from Penfield Children's Center here in Milwaukee. We'll discuss and learn from Polina what's important at Penfield around people and culture. I have volunteered at Penfield. I have supported Penfield through their annual croquet ball and work closely with their leadership team. And let me tell you, talk about work and people with a deep passion for children. So I'll go back to where I started just a moment ago and say if culture were children, Penfield leads with love. Here's a little bit about Polina before we begin our conversation together. She is Penfield's president and CEO since January of 2023 and has over 25 years of nonprofit leadership experience. Polina is an energetic, results and mission-driven nonprofit leader with a passion for helping people and organizations realize their full potential. So no more about bio. Let's get this party started and bring Polina on. Welcome, Polina.
Hi, Sean. Hi, Jason. It's great to be with you both. Thanks for having me.
Well, thanks for being here. And I always do a short bio because I always like to ask, what's one thing from your bio that I didn't mention that you're most proud of, either personally or professionally?
I joke about them a lot, but I would say that I'm most proud of my two kids. They're 10 and 14. And I'm proud of them because they're quirky and they're interesting kids. But I'm also proud of the fact that I've been able to kind of balance being a mom and having an amazing, fulfilling, but challenging career. And most days it's challenging. So it's something I don't talk a lot about. It's kind of, I try to kind of keep it behind the scenes, but it's something I'm really proud of.
Polina, before we move on to the next question, I just want to share, first off, thank you for sharing that, because to your point, I don't think we talk about that enough, that we don't talk about moms enough in particular that are holding things down at home and helping to take care of kids and being successful professionals, and the dads too. And so any chance we get to highlight that, I love to. So the question I guess I have from that is, you mentioned we don't talk about it as much as we should. Why is that, you think?
Well, I can tell you this was my first CEO position, and I had a mental model in my head of how things work in the workplace and, what my role is at CEO. And that mental model was set by what I've seen throughout my career. And there were some things that were not working for me. For instance, I'll just say I remember, I think on my second day, we had a retreat facilitated by HumanWorks that started at 8:00. And I had to twist myself into a pretzel to make sure, kids drop off happened and get into the office. And I did it. And I showed up all flustered and, and you pretend like you're cool, calm, and collected, or at least I try to. And then somebody said to me, and I was like, this just doesn't work. I don't want to have meetings at 8:00. This just does not work. And somebody said, you can do something about that. And so I have been trying to lean into, recognizing that the majority of our workforce is female. Many of them have young children in the home, not all, but many. And thinking about how do we, create space for people to take care of all parts of their life, still be accountable, still get the job done, but still be available for kids. And sometimes it's little modifications. But I will tell you, it took me a while to kind of lean into that because I had this model in my head of, well, work comes first. And, when you show up into a business environment, you don't bring your personal life with you. And that's your problem to figure out how you're going to get your kids off to school and show up to a meeting. And I've been giving myself permission to say, it doesn't have to be that way. There's an opportunity to change that. And how awesome it is that I'm in a role where I can actually, make those decisions. So I'm incredibly privileged to do that.
Paulina, and now you know me. If you would have known me then, you could have said, Sean, we're starting at 9 a.m. Okay, give us an hour. I would have said, sure.
I have nobody to blame but myself. I just wanted to be agreeable and I wanted to go along, and this is how it's always been done. And, it didn't occur to me that I was probably not the only one who maybe was struggling with this, but we all kind of keep it quiet. We all, you know, do what we need to do.
I get it. Is there anything else, Paulina, on that topic about balance, being in an executive and a leadership role? Is there anything else that helps you keep that balance, work, life? Anything else come to mind that way? Because I think those are tips that, that from real life examples of what you do that other leaders can share with their leadership team. So anything that comes to mind there around balance that helps you personally?
I had a mentor say to me when I was taking this job, and I had a lot of reservations about it. I thought that, it was going to wreak havoc on my life. And I'd seen a lot of people kind of come before me who really poured themselves into these kinds of jobs. And it wasn't exactly a model that I was looking forward to. And so this mentor of mine said two things that have stuck with me. One, you don't have to repeat the model that you've seen. That's not the only way to lead. So figure out a different way. And the second thing he said is remember the rule of diminishing returns. At 50 hours put into the week and above that point, how much value are you really creating? Take time to rest, recharge, rejuvenate. It's a tough thing, especially in the line of work that I'm in, where people tend to be givers, caregivers. They have a hard time taking care of themselves, stepping away from the work. So I really try to model that and try to recognize that it's not about the quantity of effort I put in. It's really about the quality and about being fully present and doing my best work and being realistic with myself that sure, I could be the first one in and the last one out, but is that creating true value? Probably not. And it probably creates a lot of other messages that I don't want to impart to my fellow team members here at Penfield.
I second the motion, Paulina. Thanks for sharing, because I think there's a lot of good info there. I love the rest and recharge. I think that's so important. You have to build that into life. Don't you agree that you have to sort of make time for that?
You do. I mean, nobody's going to give it to you.
Yeah, and there's one thing else you said at the beginning, and I know I wasn't going to go here originally, but you were talking about your children, and you said that you talked with them about celebrating their quirkiness. And I love that, Paulina, and how that you look at everybody's unique way they're made up, and how do you bring that celebration of people's unique sort of styles, personalities, ways of working? Do you apply that elsewhere outside of your children? That your children are teaching you that. Do you apply it elsewhere?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I've always been a huge advocate of diversity for the simple reason that I just believe through life experience that diversity leads to empirically better results. That if you're in a room full of people and everyone thinks the same way and everyone, has the same opinion, you're going to always get the same results. And when you have different ideas, different perspectives, different ways of operating, that's you just get better outcomes. And part of that is, knowing that, honoring that, and encouraging people to show up in those ways, right? Because it doesn't help if you hire people who bring diverse perspectives and talents, but they don't feel comfortable being able to speak up, if you don't have psychological safety, if you don't, allow people to be their authentic self. So I think recognizing that, and a lot of times it just starts with hiring. I mean, I've kind of trained myself over the course of years too. I think we all gravitate towards people who are like us, right? We connect and there's like a little chemistry and a buzz that happens. But I know that I get the best results just knowing who I am and my style when I surround myself with people who are complementary to me, who have different skill sets. And I want to know anytime I'm on a team, I want to know that there's a mix of people, which is why I've loved the Colby work so much. So sometimes that means when you're sitting across from somebody in an interview, I'm looking less for a feeling of comfort and more for a feeling of this person maybe is making me feel uncomfortable. They're making me think about this issue in a different way. There's something about it, about this conversation that's maybe pushing my boundaries a little bit. I'm looking for that.
I love what you're speaking part of my love language there, Paulina, really looking at people well. And you mentioned that you've used the Colby assessment through us and how that looks at somebody's natural ways of working. And I know you know your natural way really, really well, and we'll get to that here in a little bit. But you have found it helpful to really sort of target those sort of distinct differences in others to complement what you're doing.
Absolutely. I mean, I think that so much of our work, occasionally you do work by yourself, but a lot of times we do work within teams. And the media's problems usually require, there isn't a silver bullet to solve it. So you need people who think differently, who take action differently, who have different perspectives. And when you put those pieces together and when you think carefully about what are the skill sets and ways to take action that a specific problem is going to require, that I think you can assemble the best possible team. So it's a wonderful tool set.
Fantastic. Well, we went there on the quirkiness and on balance, which I love. But how did your path start, Paulina, and how did it end up today at Penfield, focusing on people and culture and building that? So, can you take us through what is your story? Where did it start, and how did it end up on people and culture at Penfield?
I've always been passionate and have essentially spent my entire career in mission driven organizations, different kinds of organizations. I've done international development, worked in grassroots organizations, I've worked in national organizations. But the common denominator is that these were all places and people that were committed to a specific mission, mostly people focused missions, and really helping people realize their full potential. So that's been the common thread in my career. I think that probably has something to do with my childhood. My parents and I immigrated to this country when I was very young. And growing up, I heard stories from my parents about the Immigrant Refugee Resettlement Organization and all these different organizations that came around them to help them get established, So my mom got enrolled in English classes, and my dad, was set up with his first job, and they helped us find an apartment, and they enrolled me in a Head Start program. And just basically all of our needs were being taken care of by these various nonprofit organizations. So I grew up from a young age hearing these stories, which become kind of like lore. And in my mind, always was left with this impression that look at these incredible organizations that create a lasting impact on people's lives. And I want to be part of that. So I was always drawn to very mission focused work. Most of my career, I've been on the programmatic side. So I've never been, when you say people and culture, I've never been in, like, say, a traditional HR role or a training role. However, being in human services, all of the work is about people. It's all about people. So, at Penfield, and this is true for most organizations I've worked at, 80% of our expenses are people. Unlike, say, an engineering or software company, we don't have some killer app technology. Our killer app is our people. They're the ones that deliver value every day. So, if you're not taking care of that part of the business in nonprofit human services work, you're lost. You're not accomplishing anything as far as I'm concerned. And then the culture piece has always been, I think, a passion and an interest of mine. I've really, the last 10, 15 years of my career have been focused on strategy for organizations, and very quickly got introduced first kind of informally by observing culture in organizations and then through studying it a little bit more formally. But I've always loved the Peter Drucker quote that culture eats strategy, what is it, for breakfast or lunch every day, and how you could have the best plans, but if you are not attending to the culture, it's not going to happen. It's not going to go anywhere. So really trying to, hold those two things in my head at the same time. Like, what is the strategy for an organization? And then how does the culture enable the organization to achieve that strategy? So it's been a growing interest of mine the last several years.
And Polina, with that, a thing I often hear leaders say is how do we have extra time for culture? So I'm just curious. You talked about the strategy piece. How do you make sure that you're leaving margin to think strategically about culture and not just leave it up to chance?
Well, I mean, it helps, first of all, to acknowledge the power of culture. I've worked in a lot of organizations where, frankly, culture was viewed as the soft, mushy stuff, and it just was not taken very seriously. So I think the first step is to have a group of leaders that recognize the central important role that culture plays. I think, like anything else, you need to make a plan for it. You can't just leave it to chance. So, just like you would have a strategic plan, and most people have, their scorecards and they have, everything's written down. I think you have to take a similarly disciplined approach to culture. So, we've been spending, I would say, an increasing amount of time at Penfield thinking about, and not just thinking about, but articulating, writing down what is our change management plan? How do we look at things like our core values and operationalize them? Like, it's not enough to just have a great poster up on the wall. I've got one right behind me. In and of itself, it does not do the work. You have to actively manage it.
Are there any aspects of culture that you're kind of focusing on next? Because at Human Works 8, we've been fortunate to work with you for several years on the different aspects of the culture. What's kind of next with that? What are some of the next things you're looking at strategically with culture to focus on?
There's a lot of pride at Penfield around our core values. They're very special to the staff, to the board, to the community. So we're very protective of them. I would say one of the priorities we've had this year to kind of further evolve our commitment to those core values is to establish a set of ground rules, or reestablish, I should say, that really help us operationalize those core values. So, what does it mean to be an employee at Penfield and live out those values on a day to day basis? Another way I kind of think about it is it's a set of guidelines and principles for how every employee leads in this organization. Not surprisingly, we did that work with Sean and AJ for Human Works. And one of you said, and this really stuck with me, is, every company has their employee handbook. Ours is about, we're reviewing it, so I can tell you, I think it's like 86 pages long. You know, Probably nobody ever reads that thing cover to cover. And I mean, other than people in your HR team. And even if they do, they promptly forget it. And so, how do we establish a set of ground rules that are succinct, descriptive enough that it basically is, if you follow these rules, if you live by these rules, you're not only are you good with the employee handbook, but you are living out the core values. So that's something that we are in the process of finalizing, and we want to introduce that to not only all of our current team members but new employees. So that's a big initiative that we're undertaking.
Since you mentioned your values, Pauline, I just want to share them with our listeners. I mentioned lead with love a couple of times in the beginning, and I've always said that's a special one for me because a lot of organizations can't use love as a value sometimes, but you can. It's all about the children and how you lead that way. Another one of yours is grow with us, which I know you also operationalize as part of your performance management and review system. You use that language with that as well. Better together, as far as focusing on teams, do what it takes, jump in, take action. And one I really like is of your values that came from the team is to be present and to really focus on the good work you're doing there and to bring your best self into work. So really strong and unique and actionable values you have there.
I can't tell you how often, and I was one of those people, how often we bring in candidates or hire somebody and organically, we usually don't even ask, it just comes out where they say, the values really spoke to me. And I think that it's really important to have core values that are so unique to your organization, your culture. It can be tough because there's so many generic, catchphrases out of there, and it's so easy to try to, have this corporate voice. But I think that employees really grab onto something when it feels real. And I would encourage more organizations to embrace the concept of love. I think it's a wonderful concept. I think a lot of our team members, myself included, we want more of that, and we want it in our work. We want to feel it towards our stakeholders. We want to feel that towards our colleagues. We want to feel a sense of accomplishment. Love is, I think, just not being afraid of powerful words has been kind of the lesson learned around Penfield's core values and why they're so effective.
What a great takeaway, Polina, for everybody. How do you find the love in your organization and on your team? That's, I love that language, and that's all you, and that's a great perspective to bring.
It's very human. We all want to be human, even in the workplace, even though we don't always know if it's okay or how to do it. I think we all strive to be human wherever we are.
Some of those successes, Paulina. What are there any? If you had to say a big challenge or something you're planning for or leading through right now, or you see ahead on the horizon as we move through this sort of a halfway point, unbelievable in 2024 towards 2025. Anything that you see from where you sit that's ahead that you may not know even how to solve it yet, or maybe you're working on it and it's ahead. Anything come to mind that way?
Oh gosh, there's a lot of big challenges for us. Exciting challenges, but a lot of big challenges, and we're trying to lean on our culture and core values as we work through them. So I would say that the big focus for Penfield right now is growth and impact. That's what we're spending a lot of time doing. We are very proud of the work we do in the Milwaukee community. We were able to work with over 1,600 kids last year, young children and their families. But we also recognize that the need for the kinds of services that we provide, the work we do, is far greater than that. And so we're really challenging ourselves about how do we grow our reach and how do we have a deeper impact in the work we're doing. We're not here because we want to deliver services. We're here because we want to transform lives. We want to ensure that children have a healthy start. And we're actually pushing ourselves as we unpack what is it that we're trying to accomplish. We are also pushing ourselves to think about how do we prevent some of the problems that children and families encounter. Yes, we want to continue to help be their problem solver and support them on their journeys, but we recognize that there's a lot of risks that children face that are entirely preventable. So how do we do that as an organization? And Penfield's been around for close to 58 years, and we've had a tremendous stability. And so while it sounds exciting, and I am the kind of person that gets excited about things like growth and impact, we also have to balance that at the same time with the fact that that kind of work leads to a lot of disruption, a lot of change, and it's very unsettling. It can be exciting, but unsettling at the same time. So helping pace that change and helping staff navigate that change so that we're going together and not losing our team in the process. That is a big area of our focus right now. So that's one I'll throw out.
Polina, are there any cool things that you're measuring right now? I know that's kind of a data geek question to throw in there, but got to get some data geek questions in there, right, for the listeners, because I know we have some that like to to dig into the data. What are some things maybe you're measuring right now related to culture or other things that are really important to you?
Well, so we're very much in the early stages of the process, so it's hard for me to fully define all of this right now. But last year we launched a scorecard, a dashboard. I'm sorry. We launched a dashboard for Penfield, and we identified all these measures across mission, people, our processes, and our financials. And I would say that when we started, our people measurements were pretty traditional things, right? The kinds of things you expect to see on a dashboard, right? Are things like our turnover rate, our retention rate, um, the diversity of our workforce, that kind of stuff. And I don't want to minimize that. That's, our vacancy rate. Those are all important things. We got to keep our eye on that. But we're having more and more conversations around employee experience. And how do we define that? And how do we measure that? And how do we measure that not just through an annual like employee engagement survey or best places to work survey, but how do we measure it throughout the year? So stay tuned. We'll have to come back to you on that, how that plays out. Another thing that we're thinking about measuring is just if we're in a period of change, how do you evaluate the readiness of the organization to take that change on? So, looking at things like change agility, how are we helping staff embrace a culture where change is not an episode or a destination, but it's how we do the work we do at Penfield? So I don't have very precise metric indicator level things to share with you right now, but it's where our leadership team is. It's what we're chewing on these days.
I love it. So it sounds like a big focus on shifting towards looking at some leading indicators that influence those traditional lagging indicators of things like looking at turnover rate, vacancy rates, and things like that. And so you're flipping it on its head and saying, hey, we want to look at some leading indicators around the experience that influence those outcome variables that we see. And then also, this is really fascinating too. I love that you're leaning into change readiness. Being wired as a 4393 myself on the Colby, I tend to have a lot of blind spots. I think I'm ready for change all the time, but then often when I'm around people that are more strategic, they're like, no, you're not. You haven't thought of X, Y, and Z yet. We need to slow down and think about those things, which I love. But I love that that is one of the big questions that you're thinking about, because not just Penfield, but whether or not anyone realizes it, whether they're listening to the show or anyone who's in the world of business, everyone is in the business of change readiness now. If you thought that you weren't, everyone in every organization is in the business of change management and change readiness and helping understand the psychological factors and supporting your people to where they can be successful in managing through that change. And that's just going to be a repeatable process from here moving forward that has to be part of your operating system as a business, is how to prepare well for that. So I love that you're leading that way and having those conversations at Penfield.
It's hard work. It's the hardest work. Honestly, the technical stuff of growth and impact is far easier than helping people embrace that and find their place in that. So it's the toughest work. But I agree. I think that everybody probably is in that business, whether they acknowledge it or not. You're either doing it proactively or it's happening to you.
That's right. Some of the change readiness going on in the Cochran household right now is with our 4-year-old twins with potty training. And let me tell you, that change readiness is just as challenging, I think, as the change readiness we deal with in the business world. Change is tough, regardless of where we are on the developmental spectrum. So that's exciting.
That was a big aha with the core values. I came in and I thought, oh my gosh, we have these amazing core values. My work here is done. Like everybody talks about them all the time. They love them. It's all over the place. I feel it. I see it. Great. I don't have to worry about that. Well, that was a huge mistake on my part. One of the things I started to kind of realize gradually, and this is something Sean and AJ have been great at reminding me of, is that, sometimes you have to reteach the core values and you have to really anchor everything you're doing in the core values. You can't just take it for granted that, like, check, you're done. And okay, you oriented the employee and maybe you sprinkle it throughout a speech and you're good. One of the issues we have is that in our branding and marketing, we've got these great catchy titles, but under those titles are definitions of what we mean by those core values, right? Like lead with love theoretically could mean lots of things to people. And what I've observed is that sometimes the nuance gets lost if people just focus on that headline, that the values can mean certain things to certain people. There isn't necessarily a shared understanding. And so it's imperative that we all, but especially the leaders in the organization, are constantly teaching, reteaching, explaining what the values mean, how we interpret those values in the day to day work. One thing we've tried to do a better job of, especially if we're tackling a project that has a heavy lift in terms of change and culture, is to try to pick one or two of the values and anchor them as like, this is the behavior we're going to have to really lean on hard in order to accomplish this change. And it's an opportunity to always talk about those values because they're more than what's at the surface, right? So, for instance, lead with love sometimes gets interpreted as it's making me, the employee, feel comfortable. And if I'm feeling uncomfortable with what's happening in the organization, then that's not leading with love. It's like, oh, okay. So, lead with love is being interpreted as comfort. But in fact, if you read the definition, it's not about comfort. It's about compassion and empathy and patience and kindness. And, a lot of times, if you think about love, Jason, you mentioned children, right? As parents or anybody who loves a child, sometimes you have to deliver some tough news or a hard lesson. And it may be very uncomfortable, but it's done out of a place of love. And so I've been struck by the fact that, you can't just rest on those core values. You have to have constant conversations about, okay, what does this mean? Or what does this mean in the particular circumstance we're in now? So that's been a hard one lesson over the last, I'd say, 6 months in particular.
I like how you've learned it though, Paulina, and you're applying it. You get it.
Still learning,
Yeah,
still
that's
learning.
always learning. You just said it yourself. Teach, reteach, and explain again. Whether that's outward or even inwardly to yourself. You talked so many good things that's happening at Penfield. If you were going to call out one thing maybe that you haven't said is to the listeners out there, why Penfield is a place to work and to grow and to thrive. And I know there's so much there. Is there anything else that comes to mind that you haven't said that you want to call out? Like, why Penfield?
It is a hard question to answer because there is so much. And I mean, honestly, first and foremost, I would have to say is the mission and the work we do with families. That's maybe the obvious answer. I think the less obvious answer that I've really appreciated is relationships. And I think that's part of the lead with love, our better together core value. And I'm talking about relationships between team members who work at Penfield, relationships that we enjoy with the families that we work with and the children. We are incredibly grateful and appreciative and never take for granted the fact that families trust us with some of the most challenging and intimate and vulnerable moments of their life and with their most precious person in their life, their child. And you can't just assume that's not always baked in. You really have to earn that. And I would say the other relationship that is very special for Penfield is just all of the different partners we have in the community. One of the most humbling things I get to experience, sometimes on a daily basis, definitely on a weekly basis, is the incredible support that we enjoy from community members, from community institutions here in Milwaukee, who are just really willing to do so much in serving the mission of Penfield. And it just never stops being a humbling experience to see that. So I'm incredibly fortunate to get to have that experience. And I think a lot of team members would say the same thing, that we have amazing relationships.
I would second that motion. I've seen it in action from all across your team and across everybody that supports Penfield and the children. So thanks, Paulina. So, Jason, are we ready to learn maybe a little bit more about Paulina?
I think so. I think we definitely should.
Is this where we talk about my horoscope?
The horoscope. Well, that might be interesting, but we call it the three parts of the mind, Paulina. We want to learn a little bit about you on how you think, what you're smart about cognitively, maybe a little bit about your personality, the affect part of your mind. And then to round it up, you brought up Colby before, and that's a philosophy, a wisdom that we use a lot to really think well about people. So we want to maybe ask you a question about that. Are you up for the three parts of the mind segment, Paulina?
I'll try.
All right. So I'll start it off. What is a hidden talent, skill, something you're smart about that most people would never know, Paulina?
I feel like I have a really great intuition and a gut. And I think most people don't know about it because for a very long time, and I'm still only just now learning to value that as a talent, is I've always thought that the cognitive skill sets are the really important ones, right? The things that you're trained in, the things that you have a certificate in. Um, the gut just seems intuition, the gut, that all feels soft and a little woo woo. But I have just countless examples of where my gut just led me to the right people, the right decisions. And I have countless examples of where my gut told me something and I disregarded it because I found a way to rationalize it, or it seemed silly, or I was looking for evidence to support that. And if I didn't find the evidence, I just wouldn't go with it. And I'm not saying that the gut is 100% right and you should just shoot from the hip on everything. I'm definitely not saying that. And that's why I try to surround myself with people who have complementary skill sets and try to be around a lot of analytical people as well. But I'm learning to lean into this is a talent of mine, this is an ability, and it can be just as valid and maybe in some instances more valid than what my brain or even my heart is telling me is true.
And Polina, the next question. So we're going to shift from cognitive. Now we're going to get to feelings. All right. We're going to talk about the affective part. So when I say what's a favorite of Polina's, could be a book, could be a song, could be food, could be a place, could be a person. What comes to mind when I ask you what's a favorite of Polina?
You know, I think the thing that I enjoy most and that makes me just most happy is connection. And so I love food because food is an opportunity. I was very much raised in a household where food is love, food is connection. So I love food. I love having deep conversations with intelligent and curious people. So I would say something I love having a meal at like a tapas place, and I love variety. So, like my favorite place is La Miranda, and I love to go there either one on one with somebody and have deep conversation, or our Penfield team went out there for lunch, which was a lot of fun because you get to pretty much order the full menu. We might have overdone it a little bit, but if you've got about 5 or 6 people, you can pretty much order the full menu and try everything and just be in community with people. That's my favorite thing.
And just to wrap up the three parts of mind, you talked a little bit about going from your gut and your Colby. If you have the freedom, the way you take action, Paulina, when you're free to do it your way, what is your natural way just to jump in and start something?
I love activating ideas. When I get excited about something, it's hard for me. I'm like a soda bottle that's been shaken really hard. So, my way of taking action a lot of times is I want to recruit other people to share my joy. So, and my colleagues know this because I don't believe I'm not necessarily an advocate of management by walking around, but I do love to pop into people's offices and say, okay, Or the other thing I'm kind of, they probably cringe, but they're being really kind about it. I love to call my colleagues on my drive into work because morning, everything is firing and I just want to share it with somebody else and I want to light the fire under other people. So that's probably my most natural tendency. Do I recognize that that is not always the most helpful or constructive way, or you got to be careful who you bring those ideas to? Yeah, absolutely. I've, with experience and age comes hopefully a little bit of wisdom about, you know, I love that expression that our weaknesses are our talents overused. So anything, overdone could become a problem. So I do try to be conscious. Some days I fail miserably, but I love to activate new ideas and I do it by, I test it with others. And if I start to see if they get the buzz, then I'm like, okay, I think we're onto something. Now, if it falls like a lead balloon, then I'm like, all right, maybe not such a great idea, Polina. Maybe let this one go.
But Paulina, I know you. There'll be another idea.
Oh, there's always there's always one.
You do you. Never stop, Paulina. That's what the world needs. That's what Penfield needs. You doing you. Thanks so much for playing a little bit of our three parts of the mind segment there. That's great to learn that about you. So, Jason, are we ready to sort of what we call sort of level up? What did we learn from Paulina on this conversation? Went so fast. For one thing, thanks for joining us, Paulina. But do you want to start, Jason? Was there a thought that jumped out at you that you want to kick off with?
Sure. I was taking copious levels of notes over here. It was so good from Polina, but just a couple that I wanted to point out that really resonated with me and are going to stick with me. The first one is you don't have to repeat the model that you see. I love that. I love that whether you're working with kids, you're working with adults, there's so much truth to that statement and so many different perspectives and circumstances in life that you have the power to take a step back and think critically and change things when things need to be changed. And I just absolutely love that. And the other thing that really struck a chord with me too is the importance of going back and reteaching values. And that's something I really want to point out to our listeners today is as leaders, you can sometimes think, okay, we did our values several years ago. We feel really good about them. Okay, but how about your teams? Do they? Because not every organization, but if you just look statistically at the numbers, turnover many times is high for companies. And so when you did your values maybe 3, 4, 5 years ago, how many maybe new team members do you have now who maybe aren't quite as familiar about that? Or maybe they have a different take on things that might be important for this organization. And so that was another key takeaway for me, Sean, is just how important it is to not just say, treat your values as 10 commandments where they're chiseled in stone and this is the way they're always going to be forever. But one of those things where you need to reteach them. There needs to be kind of a refresher over the years that as your business, as your organization, as your people, all of those things evolve and change over time. It can be good to do a refresher on those values, to think well about them and see if there's any types of updates or reteaching that needs to be done in your organization, just like with anything else that has to do with people strategy or your business thriving. So those were two key takeaways for me. How about you, Sean?
Well, Jason, I had both of those also top of mind, fabulous ideas. But I'm going to jump to Paulina said an organization's killer app is people. And everybody hear that. You want the killer app? It's people. Put focus there. And then she said two things that are just so people centered that really spoke to me. One was around hiring. And I don't think I've ever heard a leader say, you have to hire for uncomfortable. All right. And what she meant by that was hire different people with different talents, different ways of working, different instincts that complement yours. And I love that idea because I think saying it, hire for the uncomfortable, really makes it stand out. And it almost makes like, what do you mean by that? But I get what you mean, Paulina. And I think it's so true for other leaders to really think about. And then luckily, I get to finish where I started with Penfield's value of lead with love. And Paulina said, that's not just Penfield. You have to find the love in your business and talk about a really people-centered thought and perspective. And I know it's something that Human Works 8, we really believe in, bring work to life, life to work. That's what we're about, is just looking at people so well. So those are the two things, Jason, that really jumped out at me to add to your two that I think are so important.
Those are so good, Sean. Polina, I got to say, what Sean just shared there, you may need to get some trademarks for some T-shirts, for some merchandise here, for some of those sayings. Our people are our killer app. That's incredible. I love that.
There's nothing that a nonprofit organization doesn't love more than a T-shirt. So
that's right.
We'll work on that.
I love it. I love it. Well, we want to thank our listeners for tuning in today for another episode of Humanscape. Polina, thank you for being with us today. I'm going to send things over to Sean, but just as a reminder, if you haven't subscribed to the Humanscape podcast yet, please do so. We're on Apple Podcasts, we're on Spotify, and then you can also go to our website, humanworks8.com. That's humanworks, the number 8.com/podcast, and find our show there as well. We'd love for you to like and subscribe. Follow along as we have wonderful guests each week, like Polina. Sean, I'm going to send it back over to you as we wrap up.
If you liked what you heard and you want to keep wondering about people and culture, join me each week and subscribe to my Wondering Wednesday. I blog on LinkedIn and just ask questions. I don't really always have the answers because I'm looking to people like Polina to help share some answers from their great leadership perspective. But join there and get involved in the conversation that way. And we're so glad, Polina, that you gave us your valuable time today and got to talk about Penfield and the great culture and the things you're doing, focusing on people. Thanks for joining us, Polina.
Thank you so much for having me. Thank you. This was a lot of fun.
Change is inevitable. Growth is optional. Now it's up to you. See you next time.